Pokemon Sword and Shield released in about 2 months, and although it may seem pretty early to speculate this, it really makes me wonder what the next main series Pokemon game after Sword and Shield will be. Seeing as a new game comes out pretty much every single year now, if we do have a game coming out in 2020, then it most certainly is in development at this very moment. Typically in the past, Game Freak would follow nearly the same release pattern for games from Red and Blue all the way up to Black and White. This formula changed slightly in the Game Boy Advance era when we got our very first remake game in Fire Red and Leaf Green, but the pattern always went something like new generation, followed by either a remake of an older generation, or a new game based on the current generation such as Emerald, and then rinse and repeat. This whole formula changed a lot once we got Black 2 and White 2, which were unlike anything we've seen prior in a Pokemon game, and made it a lot harder to speculate what the next game could possibly be. Typically, these enhanced versions, so to say, of each generation are largely the same as the game they are based off of, such as Ruby and Sapphire compared to Emerald, with very minor tweaks and typically more of a focus on a third legendary Pokemon. Black 2 and White 2 still share the fact that they do focus on a third legendary Pokemon outside of Reshiram and Zekrom, but the game is very different from the base Black and White games, having an altered region and a much different storyline with different areas in the map, making it a proper sequel unlike any other Pokemon game before it. This is largely in part of what makes it hard to tell with any form of certainty what the next main series Pokemon game will be after Sword and Shield, since things with Pokemon releases have been pretty different with the last 6 years or so. Following Black 2 and White 2's release, we've had the first game on the 3DS as well with X and Y. Now, X and Y infamously did not have a follow-up game based on the same region like every other new generation game before it, as instead Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were the only other main series Generation 6 games released a year after X and Y. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did still fit the formula at the time, however, but then it gets a bit weird as there's no follow-up to X and Y. We got Sun and Moon instead after Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, then following Sun and Moon we got Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which was split into 2 games, kind of like how Black 2 and White 2 were split into 2 games, but they weren't anything like Black 2 and White 2 as they weren't proper sequels, and they were a lot more similar to something like Emerald or Platinum version. And then once we get onto the Switch, things get even weirder. The first main series Pokemon game on the Switch was Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which are pretty much just remakes of the Generation 1 Pokemon games Red and Blue. This was the first time we've ever had a remake-like game be the very first new main series Pokemon game on a brand new console, further throwing that old release formula out the window. Personally, I really liked that Game Freak is making changes with the way they release games, and I really liked Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And the way they release these games make it less predictable and more exciting when a new game is released. And finally, this leads us into 2019 and Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. We know a fair bit about these games already ahead of the release, and despite some controversy, these games seem like they're shaping up to be some pretty good Pokemon games. It really makes me wonder though what the game after them will be, as there's so many possibilities, more so than ever before. I think the elephant in the room for the next follow-up game would be some sort of Diamond and Pearl 4th Gen remake. Those games are due for a remake now, as it has been over 12 years since the release of Diamond and Pearl, while the first 3 generations of Pokemon received remakes within 11 or so years after release, making this the longest wait between remakes. The timing makes a lot of sense for this one, and there's a lot they can do now with the improvements in the Pokemon franchise, as well as the improvements that comes along with the Nintendo Switch. This would even be a great way to add back some of the Pokemon that were cut from the National Dex in Sword and Shield, and maybe even potentially give us brand new Mega Pokemon, kind of like what we saw with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire being a remake game with some brand new Mega Pokemon on top of X and Y. Seeing how Dynamax Pokemon and Gigantamax Pokemon have essentially replaced Mega Evolution in Sword and Shield in the 8th generation of Pokemon, I guess we could also see new versions of those in a potential Diamond and Pearl remake, which I think would be pretty cool. Just imagine seeing a Gigantamax, Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina throughout the story. That would be pretty sick. This is something I would personally love to see, as Generation 4 is one of my favorite generations, and I don't think many Pokemon fans would be very upset with the 4th gen remake. Now the next most logical step for Pokemon will be to release a follow-up game to Sword and Shield, whether it be a third version, so to say, like Platinum or Emerald, or a proper sequel like we saw with Black 2 and White 2. This potential follow-up game to Sword and Shield, much like a Diamond and Pearl remake, could add in more Pokemon and flesh out Sword and Shield a little bit more, much like how previous follow-up games like Emerald have in the past. I think a proper sequel like Black 2 and White 2 would be cooler to see rather than a third version, but personally I don't see a follow-up to Sword and Shield coming out next year in 2020. Sure, it still is possible, but seeing as if they do end up releasing a Sword and Shield follow-up in 2020, that would mean that 4 out of the last 5 Pokemon main series games were based on Alola or Galar, which is a bit overkill in my opinion. Still don't think it's impossible, but I believe it would be better to release a different type of game in 2020, and then have the Sword and Shield follow-up release in 2021 to make it feel a little bit fresher, much like how the release cycle in the GBA era was with Ruby and Sapphire first, followed by Fire Red and Leaf Green, and then we go back to Hoenn with Pokemon Emerald in the following year. Another possibility for the 2020 Pokemon game is we get another Let's Go type style of game. The Let's Go game sold well on the Nintendo Switch, and it could be enough to entice Game Freak or Nintendo to make another similar game. If they do end up doing this, it would make a lot of sense to see the Let's Go game take place in Johto. I would personally like a game like this, and although I don't see it selling as well as the Generation 1 Let's Go games did, I still think it would be a pretty popular game that enough people will enjoy. They could also technically fuse the Let's Go and Remake game in the same concept and release a Let's Go game based off of Diamond and Pearl, I guess. I see this as the least likely of all these scenarios, and less likely than a Generation 2 Let's Go game, but we can't exactly rule it out just yet. Based on how the last few years of Pokemon releases have been, pretty much anything can happen, and they've been pretty much unexpected. And the final possibility is something completely new that we don't expect, much like what happened with Let's Go in 2018. Now, I don't think we would see Generation 9 as it is a bit too early to release a brand new generation just a year later, but there isn't really anything stopping Game Freak from doing something way different at this point. If they somehow out of nowhere decide to release Generation 9 so soon, only a year after release of Generation 8, one thing that I would love to see Generation 9 focus on would be Pokemon fusions. If you guys remember back in the Sun and Moon era, there was a lot of rumors about Pokemon fusion based off some obscure side manga that we have in the Pokemon series. This was further amplified when we first learned about Ash Greninja, which is essentially Ash fuses Greninja. Would be very cool in my opinion to see more proper Pokemon fusions outside of just the Kyurem ones, which don't really count in my opinion. I feel like this is the direction that Pokemon will ultimately go down in some way, shape, or form in the future, as Pokemon fusion makes a lot of sense, and I feel like it's something that Game Freak for whatever reason is either holding on to or doesn't want to do until a later date. I would love to see this. I think it would be cool, a great way to introduce new Pokemon, sorta, without having a brand new Pokemon. Kind of like what they do with Galar and Alolan forms, how they are essentially new Pokemon. They are very different Pokemon they are based off of, but they don't take up that brand new Dex number. It is also possible we see a year off from Game Freak and Pokemon as well, since Game Freak hasn't had a year off since 2015, and could take some more time to work on future releases. It could be a fun year for spin-off Pokemon titles, as we really haven't had too many Pokemon spin-off games in the past few years on home consoles, and outside of Pokken, which is a port of a Wii U game, we don't have any retail versions of a spin-off Pokemon game on the Switch. Now, although Game Freak has little to nothing to do with most of these spin-off Pokemon games, I think it would still be pretty nice to see Game Freak take a year off and see Nintendo focus on releasing spin-off games. We don't really have too many on the Switch like I just mentioned, and we haven't seen a brand new Pokemon Ranger game or a brand new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon in a number of years now. I think Pokemon Ranger would be very nice on Nintendo Switch. It's definitely something I would like to see, as I am a fan of the very first game. Still haven't gotten around to playing the other two. And when it comes to Mystery Dungeon is arguably the most loved spin-off Pokemon series in a long time. We haven't seen a brand new release in a couple of years since the last brand new Mystery Dungeon game on the Nintendo 3DS, which although I have not played it, I have heard it is one of the best in this series. I'm sure a lot of Pokemon fans would be very happy with this, myself included, and it would be a great distraction following a big 2021 with a brand new Pokemon game. This year off, giving Game Freak more time to work on a follow-up game could be a way to get some more trust back from some Pokemon fans. Even though I don't personally agree with this, a lot of people are very upset and calling Game Freak lazy, and having this year off giving them extra time could help prove those people wrong. I personally think a year off is one of the more likely situations, right next to a Diamond and Pearl remake. Either way, we won't know for sure until at least the spring or so of 2020, when we start seeing trailers and teasers and get closer to E3 time. But with all that being said, let me know in the comments down below which you guys think the next Pokemon game could be, or what you just want the next game to be, even if it isn't entirely realistic. It's still fun to speculate, and I'm still excited to see what the next Pokemon is after Sword and Shield.